What you're about to hear will shock you to your core. It's a story so twisted, so unbelievable, that it sounds like fiction. But every word is true. This is the story of how absolute power corrupted absolutely, how an emperor's grief turned into madness, and how that madness led to one of history's most horrifying acts. Before we dive deep into this dark tale, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this community after hearing what Rome's most infamous emperor did in the name of love. Picture this: Rome, 67 AD. The most powerful empire in the world is ruled by a man who has completely lost his grip on reality. The bronze doors of the imperial palace seal shut with a thunderous clang, trapping 300 of Rome's most powerful senators inside. They're about to witness something that will haunt the empire for generations. An imperial wedding, unlike anything the world has ever seen. The air in that marble throne room was thick with incense and fear. Silk robes rustled as senators shifted nervously in their seats. Their breathing came shallow and quick because they knew something was terribly wrong. At the altar stood Emperor Nero, but not as they'd ever seen him before. He wore full bridal regalia, the flame-colored veil of a Roman bride draped across his powerful shoulders. But that wasn't the shocking part. All eyes were fixed on the veiled figure beside him. Smaller, delicate, moving with an eerily practiced grace. As Nero lifted the wedding veil, gasps echoed off the marble walls. Senator Thracia's wine cup clattered to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. What they saw before them defied every law of nature and man. It wasn't a bride at all, but a transformed boy named Sporus, surgically altered and psychologically molded to resurrect Nero's dead wife, Poppaea Sabina. Nero's voice rang out across the stunned assembly with divine authority. "Behold, senators, of Rome, my beloved Poppaea has returned to me. But how did we get here? How does absolute power transform into absolute madness? Why would Rome's emperor transform a young man to resurrect his deceased wife? To understand this horror, we must go back 2 years. Back to the night everything changed forever. It was the summer of 65 AD when Nero's fist connected with Poppaea's pregnant belly for the last time. The physician's hands trembled as he confirmed what everyone in the palace already knew but dared not speak. The empress was dead, and Nero had killed her. The marble floor still bore traces of blood, despite the slaves frantically scrubbing. The stains had already set, permanent reminders of imperial rage. In the corner of the bedchamber, a shattered wine amphora lay in pieces, its contents mixing with darker fluids across the floor. The heavy summer night hung thick with death and disbelief. Nero knelt beside the bed, his toga splattered with wine and worse. His knuckles were split and swollen from the violence. "Get up," he whispered to the still form. "Stop this game." But Poppaea Sabina would never rise again. Her body lay twisted at an unnatural angle, her swollen belly 8 months with child, having taken the full force of the emperor's rage. Palace servants huddled in doorways, having heard the fight escalate from the dining hall. They'd heard Poppaea's voice cutting through the night. "You missed another racing event for your ridiculous performances." Then came the crash of furniture, the emperor's roar, and the sickening sounds that followed. Senator Petronius arrived within the hour, his face going pale at the scene. "Divine Augustus," he breathed. "What have you done?" Nero's eyes blazed with something beyond madness. "She provoked me," he snarled. "She knew I hate criticism of my art." His voice cracked with emotion. "She knows I hate it." The physician worked in terrified silence. His examination confirmed everyone's worst fears. The child was dead too, killed by the same violence that claimed its mother. But that was before the screaming started. Nero's wail split the night as he threw himself across Poppaea's body. "No, You can't leave me. His fists pounded the mattress. I forbid it. I am emperor. I forbid you to die. Guards exchanged terrified glances. They'd seen Nero's rages before, but this was different. This was a mind-splitting from reality, like a ship breaking apart in a storm. By dawn, word spread through the palace like plague. Whispers echoed in the corridors, hushed conversations behind closed doors. The Empress was dead. The Emperor had killed her, and something in Nero had shattered, beyond repair. The funeral preparations began immediately, but Nero refused to let them take the body. For 3 days, he remained locked in the chamber with Poppaea's corpse. Servants delivered food and went untouched while they heard him talking to her, singing to her, begging her to wake up. When they finally convinced him to emerge, his appearance shocked even hardened politicians. His hair hung wild and unkempt. His eyes were red-rimmed and unfocused. But most disturbing was his smile. "She's not really gone," he told the gathered senators with that terrifying grin. "Poppaea could never truly leave me." The state funeral proceeded with all the pomp Rome could muster, but throughout the ceremony, Nero kept turning to space beside him, whispering to air, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. What happened next defied every Roman tradition and law. Instead of cremation, the Roman way, Nero ordered Poppaea's body embalmed like an Egyptian queen. He filled her veins with precious spices and wrapped her in Syrian silk. She always admired Eastern customs, he explained to horrified priests. She appreciated this. The Senate watched in stunned silence as their emperor descended into grief-fueled madness, but none dared speak. They'd seen what happened to those who criticized Nero. In the weeks that followed, Nero's behavior grew more erratic. He commissioned hundreds of statues of Poppaea and placed them throughout the palace. Servants reported finding him talking to them, sharing meals with bronze and marble. He ordered her clothes kept exactly as she left them, her cosmetics untouched, her chambers preserved like a shrine. "She visits me," he told his freedmen with complete conviction. "At night, she forgives me. She understands it was an accident." But Nero wasn't content with statues and memories. He began searching for her among other women, calling companions to the palace and dressing them in Poppaea's clothes. But it never worked. "The eyes are wrong," he'd rage. "The voice is wrong. Everything is wrong." These women would flee the palace in tears, the lucky ones anyway. Then came the dreams. Nero would wake screaming, "She's angry. She wants to come back." He consulted mystics and fortune-tellers, anyone who claimed to speak with the dead. They all told him what he wanted to hear. "Yes, divine emperor, the empress wishes to return. She merely needs a vessel." When the court physician tried to reason with him, saying, "Grief is natural, Caesar, but the dead cannot return," Nero's response chilled the room. "Cannot? I am Nero. I am the emperor. I am a god. If I say the dead return, then they return." His obsession consumed him completely. He neglected state duties, missed Senate meetings, and spent hours staring at Poppaea's death mask, tracing its features with trembling fingers. "I'll find you," he whispered to the cold marble. "I'll bring you back. I swear it on my divine blood." Palace staff learned to play along, to nod when he spoke of her return, to agree when he said she was merely traveling. Survival depended on feeding his delusion. Senator Seneca, once Nero's tutor, observed the decline with horror. "He's crossed from grief into something else," he wrote in a private letter. "Something Rome has never seen. A madness that believes itself divine." But Nero's search had only begun. His agents scoured the empire, looking for something specific, someone young, beautiful, with delicate features, and most importantly, a face that could be molded. Because in Nero's fractured mind, Poppaea wasn't truly gone. She was simply waiting to be reborn. Spring of 66 AD, brought chaos to the palace corridors as slaves rushed past carrying trays of wine, and musicians tuned their instruments for another of Nero's elaborate banquets. In the midst of this controlled chaos, a new face appeared among the pages serving at court. His name was Sporus, perhaps 15 years old, maybe 16. Records conflict on his exact age. What they all agreed on was his beauty, delicate features that seemed carved by the gods themselves, skin smooth as marble, eyes that caught the light like polished amber. He'd arrived from the Greek provinces just weeks before, another pretty boy for the imperial household. Rome had seen hundreds like him over the years, but Nero saw something else entirely. The moment came during a routine wine service when Sporus bent to fill the emperor's cup. A strand of dark hair fell across his face, and the lamplight caught his profile just so. Nero's hand shot out like a striking snake, gripping the boy's wrist. Wine splashed across the table as the emperor commanded, in a voice strange and urgent, "Stop." The entire dining hall fell silent. Senators paused mid-conversation, and slaves froze in place. All eyes turned to the emperor's table, but Nero saw none of them. His gaze was fixed entirely on the trembling page. What followed sent chills through every witness. "Turn your head," Nero ordered with growing excitement. "To the left. Now, right?" Sporus obeyed, confusion written across his delicate features. The emperor rose from his couch and began circling the boy like a predator, sizing up its prey. His breathing grew rapid and excited. "The nose," Nero whispered in wonder. "The curve of the lips, even the way you hold your shoulders." When his secretary leaned forward, asking if something was wrong, Nero didn't answer. His fingers reached out and touched Sporus's cheek. The boy flinched, but didn't dare pull away. "Poppaea," Nero breathed with religious awe. "You've come back to me." The hall erupted in whispers and alarmed glances. Everyone knew the empress had been dead for months, but the look in Nero's eyes brooked no argument. This wasn't grief speaking anymore. This was something far more dangerous. "What's your name, boy?" Nero's voice carried an edge of desperate hope. "Sporus, divine Caesar. From Corinth." "No." The emperor's grip tightened. "Your true name. The one you're hiding." Sporus's eyes darted frantically around the room, seeking help and finding none. The other slaves had already begun backing away. They recognized that look in their master's eye. Someone was about to become the focus of an imperial obsession, and heaven help whoever that was. "Come with me," Nero commanded, not waiting for compliance. His hand closed around Sporus's arm and dragged him from the hall, leaving the abandoned banquet sitting in stunned silence. In Nero's private chambers, the examination continued with scientific precision. He made Sporus walk, stand, turn, and speak. Each movement seemed to excite the emperor more. "The gods are mocking me," he muttered, "sending her back in this form, testing my power." When Sporus tried to protest, "Caesar, I don't understand. I'm just a page. I serve wine. I know nothing of the empress." Nero's hand cracked across his face. "Don't lie to me. I see her in you, behind your eyes, waiting." By dawn, Nero had already summoned his physicians, the best surgeons money could buy. Word of the emperor's discovery spread through the palace like wildfire. Within hours, every servant knew that Nero had found a boy who looked like his dead wife, and he was planning something unprecedented, something that violated every law of nature and man. Sporus found himself moved to luxurious rooms near the emperor's quarters, but the golden cage was still a cage. Guards stood at every door, and his old life, what little there was of it, had vanished like smoke. When the court physicians arrived at dawn, their medical implements clinked ominously in their cases. Behind them came 3 specialists from Alexandria, masters of the surgical arts, their faces carefully neutral, as Nero explained his requirements with fevered intensity. He must be perfect, the emperor insisted. Every detail, every curve. The gods sent him to me incomplete. You will finish their work. The physicians exchanged glances. What Nero demanded pushed beyond medicine into madness, but refusing meant death. We'll need to examine the subject, the head physician said. Carefully, determine what's possible. The examination lasted hours. Sporus stood shivering as strange hands prodded and measured him like livestock. Calipers traced his features while drawings were made and comparisons drawn to Poppaea's death mask, all while Nero watched with fevered intensity, his eyes never leaving the proceedings. The facial structure is remarkably similar, one surgeon admitted reluctantly. With some adjustments to the brow, the cheekbones. He trailed off, unwilling to voice the full horror of what they discussed. And the rest? Nero demanded. Can you make him complete? The physician's silence spoke volumes. Finally, the head doctor cleared his throat. There are procedures from the East used on certain slaves. But the risk, I don't care about risk. Nero's fist slammed the table. I care about results. You have 1 week to prepare. Fail me, and you'll discover how creative an emperor can be with punishment. As the physicians fled in terror, Sporus remained behind, alone with his future tormentor. Nero approached slowly, his mood shifting like quicksilver, now tender, now terrible. Does it frighten you? He asked almost gently. What's to come? The boy chose his words carefully, understanding that his life hung in the balance with every syllable. I live to serve Caesar's will. Clever answer. Nero's finger traced Sporus's lips with possessive tenderness. She was clever, too. Quick with words. You'll need to learn her phrases, her laugh, the way she moved through a room like water. His grip suddenly tightened until Sporus gasped. You'll become her, or die trying. Asterisk that night, as Sporus lay awake in his golden prison, he could hear preparations beginning through the walls. Metal instruments being sharpened, herbs being ground for potions, and the whispered conversations of slaves discussing his fate. The machinery of transformation had begun, and there was no escape. The surgeons worked with disturbing efficiency over the following weeks. What they did to Sporus in those medical chambers pushed the boundaries of ancient medicine into realms of horror. They reshaped his face with bronze tools, narrowing the bridge of his nose, elevating his cheekbones, adjusting the angle of his jaw. Each modification brought him closer to Poppaea's image and further from himself. But facial surgery was only the beginning. The complete alteration of Sporus's physical form required procedures so traumatic that even hardened medical professionals understood they were crossing into blasphemy. Yet Nero's eager supervision brooked no hesitation. Between surgical sessions, Sporus lay in agony in a specially prepared recovery chamber, fed broths and medicines to prevent infection. The pain never stopped. It simply moved from unbearable to merely agonizing. When an elderly slave, changing his bandages, asked if he thought he would die, she paused in her work and said quietly, "Death would be a mercy, child. You're becoming something else. Something that exists only in the emperor's madness." The psychological torture paralleled the physical transformation. Nero insisted that Sporus learn Poppaea's mannerisms, her walk, her laugh, the way she held a wine cup. Hours of practice before mirrors, while the emperor corrected every imperfection with increasing obsession. "No, no," Nero would rage. She tilted her head when amused. "Like this. Watch me and learn." And Sporus learned, because what choice did he have? His body had been carved into someone else's image. Now his mind must follow. He studied Poppaea's favorite poems, memorized her opinions on art and music, and learned to speak in her cadences. The boy who was Sporus faded with each lesson. For 12 hours a day, Sporus practiced Poppaea's walk, while Nero watched from the shadows. The transformation chamber had become a theater of resurrection, with mirrors lining every wall, multiplying Sporus's image into infinity. Each reflection showed the same carved face, the same carefully crafted form. Again, Nero commanded from his throne. The hips must sway exactly as hers did, like water flowing over stones. His eyes never left Sporus's form, studying, comparing, finding imperfection in every gesture. The correction sessions grew more intense each day. Nero spoke to Sporus as if he were truly Poppaea, referencing memories the boy couldn't possess, demanding reactions to events he'd never witnessed. And Sporus learned to provide them because survival depended on maintaining the Emperor's delusion. "Yes, my love," Sporus whispered in practiced tones that were no longer his own. "The fountain sparkled that day, like your eyes when you sang." The words tasted like ash, but they earned a smile from his tormentor. Voice coaches arrived from Greece, movement instructors from Egypt, all tasked with one impossible goal: resurrect the dead through living flesh. "The laugh must come from here," the voice instructor insisted, hand on Sporus's throat. Light, musical, like bells in the wind. They practiced until his voice cracked, until his throat burned raw, until Poppaea's laugh emerged perfect and horrible from his mouth. But Nero's preparations went beyond mere performance. The emperor commissioned exact replicas of Poppaea's wardrobe, every stola, every jewel, every cosmetic she'd favored. Sporus spent hours learning to apply them correctly, feeling the weight of gold on his wrists, the drape of silk across altered hips, the suffocating embrace of femininity forced upon him. She preferred Egyptian kohl, Nero instructed, watching Sporus paint his eyes. Applied with a steady hand, never too heavy. She said it made her look like Cleopatra. His fingers traced Sporus's cheek with disturbing tenderness. "You're becoming more beautiful each day, more like her." The compliments were worse than criticisms, because they reminded Sporus how completely he'd been erased. In the mirrors, Poppaea's face stared back, moved when he moved, smiled when he forced his lips upward, a living reflection of the dead. Senate meetings became irregular, as Nero's obsession consumed him entirely. He spent every waking hour in the transformation chamber, teaching, correcting, and perfecting his impossible creation. State business accumulated unattended while Rome governed itself, and its emperor played God with flesh and memory. The lessons extended beyond appearance. "Tell me about your favorite horse," Nero demanded during one session. "The Arabian mare I gifted you for our anniversary." Sporus had learned to navigate these tests by drawing on documented knowledge of Poppaea's life. "Starlight," he responded smoothly. "She had a white blaze down her nose. I fed her honey cakes." "Yes." Nero's face lit with sick joy. "You remember. You're coming back to me fully now." He pulled Sporus into an embrace that made the boy's skin crawl. "Soon we'll ride together again, just like before." The physical memorization went deeper than anyone imagined possible. Poppaea had specific ways of holding wine cups, of reclining at banquets, of touching her hair when thinking. Each gesture had to be perfect, natural, unconscious. Sporus practiced until muscle memory overrode thought. "She's in there," Nero would murmur during these sessions, his delusion now complete. "I see her more clearly each day, fighting through, returning to me." He no longer saw Sporus at all, only the ghost he'd carved from living flesh. As the final day of transformation approached, Sporus felt the last of his identity slipping away like sand through fingers. He moved like Poppaea, spoke like Poppaea, even dreamed her dreams. Memories absorbed through endless repetition. The boy from Corinth was nearly gone. Meanwhile, Rome's elite received their shocking summons. Senator Thracia's wine cup shattered on marble when he read the wedding invitation bearing Nero's personal seal. The message was brief but world-shattering. The divine Emperor Nero Augustus commands your presence at the sacred union between himself and the Empress Poppaea Sabina, restored to life through imperial will. Similar scenes played across Rome's elite households, senators receiving the impossible invitation, processing its implications, understanding the trap Nero had set. Attendance meant participating in blasphemy. Absence meant death. The emperor had learned to make compliance an art form. This wasn't Nero's first grotesque performance. 2 years before, he'd married his freedman Pythagoras, but that had been different. A private ceremony with few witnesses, easy to dismiss as imperial eccentricity. This was public theater on an unprecedented scale. Remember Pythagoras? 1. Senator asked his colleague at the baths, steam rising around them like spirits. Nero wore the bridal veil, played the virgin bride. We thought that was rock bottom. His companion's laugh held no humor. There is no bottom, only deeper circles of madness. Asterisk, but these senators had learned the price of resistance. They'd seen the arena executions, the garden parties where Christians burned as human torches, the systematic destruction of anyone who dared oppose the emperor's will. Survival meant compliance, no matter how horrific the demand. We go, the senior senator decided with grim resignation. We witness, we applaud, we survive. And we pray the gods understand we had no choice. On the wedding morning, every senator's seat would be filled. The machinery of social obligation ground forward despite the horror at its heart, because refusing an imperial invitation meant death, not just for themselves, but for their entire families. As the bronze doors groaned, fully open that fateful day, revealing 300 faces frozen in practiced awe, Nero led his bride onto the wedding platform. Each step was deliberate and theatrical, designed for maximum impact. The senators rose as one, their movements synchronized through fear, through practice, through the muscle memory of survival in a world gone mad. Behold, Nero's voice rang across the marble chamber. The power of divine will. Poppaea Sabina, my beloved empress, returned from the realm of shadows. Applause erupted, not spontaneous, but rehearsed. Each senator clapped with precise enthusiasm, their faces masks of joy hiding bottomless horror. Because on that platform stood impossibility itself. A boy carved into a ghost, a delusion made flesh through surgery and pain. Sporus moved as Poppaea had moved, glided between the ceremonial flames with surgically perfected grace. The dress caught light like water. The jewels blazed like stars. And in that light, for terrible moments, even the senator saw what madness had created through the power to resurrect through transformation. She's beautiful, someone whispered with staged wonder, more radiant than ever. Another agreed, playing the game, speaking the lines, validating madness to keep breathing. Death has only enhanced her beauty. The ceremony proceeded with grotesque normalcy. The augur read omens, all favorable, of course. A sacred flame was lit. Vows were spoken with Nero's voice trembling with genuine emotion as he pledged eternal love to his manufactured bride. Sporus responded in Poppaea's remembered cadences, each word perfect, each gesture precise. I take you, Nero Claudius, Caesar Augustus, as my lord and emperor in this life and whatever lies beyond. The vow came smoothly, practiced, empty of everything but trained sound. But Nero heard love, heard his wife return, his face glowing with terrible joy. The ceremony concluded with a traditional kiss, and in that moment, watching their emperor embrace his own delusion, the Senate of Rome understood that sanity itself had become treason. As the wedding feast began, the true horror revealed itself, not in the ceremony, which was mere theater, but in the aftermath, in the small moments and casual interactions. Nero introduced his bride to senators who'd known the real Poppaea, forcing them to acknowledge, to validate, to participate in the lie. "You remember Senator Marcus," Nero said to Sporus. "He complimented your dancing at the harvest festival." Sporus turned with Poppaea's smile, extending her hand. "Of course. How could I forget? You said I moved like Diana herself." Marcus took the offered hand, kissed it, felt surgically altered flesh, saw a boy's face carved into feminine beauty, and smiled. "My lady, more lovely than ever." This continued throughout the night. Each interaction was a small betrayal of truth, each acknowledgement another brick in the wall of shared delusion. The senators learned to see what Nero saw, or at least pretend convincingly enough to survive. And so Rome witnessed the impossible, an emperor so consumed by grief and madness that he literally carved a new reality from living flesh. 300 of the empire's most powerful men sat in that chamber, watched a boy transformed into a ghost, and called it divine will because the alternative was death. This wasn't just the story of one mad emperor or one unfortunate boy. This was the story of how truth dies, how reality bends when power becomes absolute, and how ordinary people become complicit in the unthinkable simply by choosing to survive another day. The bronze doors of that throne room didn't just seal in senators that day. They sealed in a moment when the impossible became possible, when madness became law, and when the dead truly did walk among the living through the terrible alchemy of unlimited power and unlimited pain. Asterisk, what happened to Sporus after that wedding? History records that he lived for several more years, trapped in Poppaea's identity, until Nero's eventual downfall. But by then, the boy from Corinth was gone, forever, replaced by a living ghost who existed only to feed an emperor's impossible delusion. This is what absolute power looks like when it meets absolute grief, not just the corruption of a single man, but the corruption of an entire society, forced to validate madness or face destruction. And in that marble chamber in Rome, truth itself died as surely as if it had been placed on one of Nero's pyres and burned as entertainment for the gods. The wedding of Nero and his manufactured bride remains one of history's most chilling examples of how far human beings will go to survive, and how far they'll allow others to fall in service of their own preservation. It's a story that should never be forgotten, because it shows us exactly what we're capable of when we allow power to exist without limits and madness to masquerade as divinity. If this story has shocked you as much as it should, make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on this incredible piece of history, and don't forget to let me know wherein the world you're watching from. Stories like this remind us why we must never forget the darkest chapters of human history, because only by remembering can we hope to prevent them from happening again.